anything, thank you very much, Alex. I just started. So yes, we're recording now. Is there any questions on things? I know for some folks, they won't really start to have questions until they start to go over the material and read through it. I get that. But was there anything jumping out immediately when I started or when I left off? I mean, I hate to say it, but a lot of what I'm going to be covering right now is just purely just straight up memorization. You know, and I try to explain, you know, the whys to some of that, those facts, just so it helps you to understand it. But if there is any time, feel free to ask away about with any questions about anything. So well, first of all, let me ask you folks this. There's 4 tissue types. I'm not going to ask it because it'll take too long to write it out. Remember, there's 4 tissues in the human body. We covered the first one Tuesday, epithelial tissue. We're going to start with the second one tonight, connective tissue, okay? And then we'll cover muscle tissue and nervous tissue. All right, epithelial tissue and connective tissue, there's a lot involved, but muscle tissue and nervous tissue, people don't have as much to go on, all right, or worry about. So let's start off. First, talk about connective tissue, and I need you to understand something. Connective tissue has 3. This is for all types of connective tissue. So for all of the connective tissue that we're going to talk about tonight, all right, this applies to all of it. All connective tissue has three basic components. Okay? The first one are cells. The second one is protein fibers. And the third one is ground substance. Okay? So all connective tissue, all right, have 3 basic components: cells, protein fibers, and ground substance. Okay? So let's talk about the first component, cells. All right? So certain classes of connective tissues have specific cell types to that connective tissue. But now, one of the things that you want to understand about connective tissue versus epithelial tissue, when we looked at epithelial tissue, all the cells were closely packed, right? They touched each other. Well, when we talk about connective tissues, all right, most of the cells do not directly connect or contact one another. Keep that in mind. That is a big difference between those 2 tissue types. All right? So, we have 2 classes of cells: resident cells and wandering cells. So essentially, resident cells stay in place. Wandering cells do just that. They wander around. All right? So we think of resident cells as stationary. They live inside the connective tissue, and their job is going to be that of support, maintenance, and repair of extracellular matrix. Well, what the heck is that? All right, I'm going to tell you what that is. Extracellular matrix is going to be protein fibers, okay, and put it right here, ground substance. Oops, let's go back. Okay. Does everybody see that? All right. Extracellular matrix has 2 components: protein fibers. Oh. Well, I just messed that. Oh, okay. It should be protein fibers, all right, and ground substance. Okay. So keep that in mind. And so going back to the previous slide here, we saw that all connective tissue has 3 basic components: cells, protein fibers, and ground substance. So if both of these all right, make up the extracellular matrix. Okay? Okay. So you could actually say that connective tissue is made up of cells and extracellular matrix. All right. Make sure that you understand that. All right. So let's talk about some of the different types of resident cells. First one of my favorites, are the fibroblasts. Now, these fibroblasts look like a football. Okay. They have tapered ends, something like that. Okay. They're the most abundant type of cell, all right, in what we call connective tissue proper. There's three types of connective tissue. All right, I'm going to write this out, and hopefully I can get this. All right, so you have connective tissue, also known as CT. All right, and there's three types, three categories. You have connective tissue proper. All right, the second one is going to be supporting connective tissue. All right, and the third is going to be fluid connective tissue. Okay? So what we're looking at with the fibroblasts, all right, these are the most abundant resident cells in the first of the three types of connective tissue proper. And what do? All right, they're going to make the protein fibers and the ground substance, which is the extracellular matrix. Okay? So they're the guys, for example, that help to make scar tissue in your skin. You get a cut, significant amount, all right, you get scar tissue formation. It's these cells that make that scar tissue. Okay? All right, adipocytes. We talked briefly about this when we were talking about lipids, okay? Fat cells. And they look like grapes, okay? A cluster, well, I won't say like in that shape, but it's that configuration. They grow in clusters, okay? So when we get enough of them around, then we refer to that as the adipose connective tissue. When we have large clusters, right? Adipocytes. And what do? They store energy, triglycerides, lipids. The third type of resident cell are mesenchymal cells. Whenever you see mesenchyme or mesenchymal whatever, you want to think of this term right here, embryonic stem cell. A stem cell can differentiate, which means turn into other types of cells. It could turn into cartilage cells or bone cells or muscle cells, all right? There are some limitations, all right? But it is a stem cell, okay? So what will happen is if you have a damaged cell, it will divide, all right, into two cells, all right? One of those cells will turn into another mesenchymal cell. The other one becomes the committed cell, and a committed cell is the cell that was damaged, let's say. So mesenchymal cells. The next one is called a fixed macrophage. Macrophage is the Pac-Man of your immune system, but a fixed macrophage stays in place. It doesn't move anywhere. It looks like, we call it an irregular shaped cell. It's an amorphous blob kind. It just has this kind of blobby kind of shape to it, okay? And it comes from this cell. It's called a monocyte. It's a white blood cell. So monocytes float around in your blood, okay? And when they leave your blood and get into the tissue, they'll turn into a macrophage. So we have our fixed macrophage living in our tissue, right? It's all throughout the connective tissue. And what is their job? Their job is to go around and Pac-Man, all right? So here's our amorphous kind of macrophage, all right? And you have a damaged cell or a bacteria or a virus here, and it surrounds it like so, and it gobbles it up. And so it will surround it, and pull it to the inside, okay, and digest it. That process is called phagocytation, which means to engulf. So when you hurt yourself, the macrophages get called on the scene, all right, and they just start gnawing away at the damaged tissue there because it's going to put in new tissue where it was damaged, okay? They have many other things. They don't just eat stuff. They'll do other things. When they're a part of the immune system, what they'll do is they'll wander around and they'll find a foreign bacteria and they'll or foreign protein, I should say. And sometimes when they eat it, all right, then they break it down and then they start putting the parts of it that it ate on the outside of its skin. It's really weird. It's like that weird cannibal that would wear you know, like trophies of their kill or whatever. And what it does is it'll stick these proteins, these foreign proteins on its outside, and then it goes and wanders around and starts showing it off to other white blood cells. You know, it says, hey, look what I got. And then these white blood cells are like, whoa, 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 whoa. No, that's bad, you know? And then it starts the immune process. All right. So that's the first type of cells, are the resident cells. The second type are the wandering cells. So these guys are moving throughout the connective tissue, right? And they're pretty much the main, I won't say the main components, but they're largely made up of immune cells, okay? So they'll come in, if there's damage to certain tissues, they'll come in and they'll repair that damage, okay? Or if there are viruses, bacteria, whatever, all right, they'll go in and try to protect the body from that. So they're white blood cells. The proper name for white blood cells are leukocytes. Leukocytes. So these wandering cells are primarily components of our immune system here. So the first type are called mast cells. And we'll find them, all right, in the connective tissue, all right, but they're going to be in close proximity to blood vessels because they serve a couple different roles. But they have two chemicals inside of them. One is heparin. You guys may have heard of that. Heparin's a blood thinner, okay? And histamine. Most of you have probably definitely heard of that because you've heard of antihistamines. So what will happen is with heparin, it will stop the blood from clotting. All right? And histamines will dilate the blood vessels. So if we're looking down one of our blood vessels, and this is how it looks normally, all right, when histamine's around, it gets really big. So more blood can flow through and more things can travel down. So if you get tissue damage going on, we want to repair the tissue, all right? But in order to do that, we got to bleed into the tissue because we need some cells from our blood to help fix it. So the mast cells, which are in the tissue near the blood vessel, they'll release the heparin. So if any blood gets into that tissue, it stops the blood from clotting right away, all right? Because if it clots right away, it'll block off the cells that we need to still be streaming in from the blood vessel. All right. And not only that, histamine will dilate. Is that why healing wounds are itchy? You know, it's so funny that you say that, Heather. The reason why healing wounds are itchy is exactly, well, one of the reasons. A good way, or one of the side effects of increased blood flow to the area, all right, is itchiness. That's a very good question. So yes, is the answer to that question. So when we dilate blood vessels, we not only increase the size of the space there inside the blood vessel so more blood can flow, but we space out. Remember last class we talked about the lining of blood vessels when we were talking about epithelium, and we call that lining endothelium. And the lining of blood vessels are simple squamous cells, but they touch each other. Well, when we get vasodilation, then it pushes those cells apart slightly, okay? And that allows the stuff inside our blood to get out. White blood cells are able to get out to kill any bacteria or foreign invaders. You'll learn more about mast cells in chapter 19, not this semester. I know it's real. I could go on, guys. I'm sorry. You don't understand. For me to teach this class to you folks, I have to fight the urge to just flood you with so much information that I want you to know. But I know the benefit of having hindsight and teaching 211. I know that you are going to be learning a lot of this stuff in more detail in 211. So I'm not sweating that. All right, so plasma cells, okay? These cells come from B lymphocytes. So these cells start off as a B lymphocyte, and when the immune situation occurs, right, they come in contact with let's say COVID-19. So these B lymphocytes, when they come in contact with COVID-19, all right, not all of them, but some of them will transform into plasma cells. And it's those plasma cells, all right, that will create the antibodies. And it's the antibodies that will go out there and attack the COVID-19 virus and kill it. Okay? So plasma cells start off as B lymphocytes, but the only cell that can make an antibody is a plasma cell. Okay? So in order for antibodies to be made, B lymphocytes have to transform into a plasma cell, and then they can make the antibodies. All right, we saw the fixed macrophages. Well, the free macrophages have the same properties, okay? They can just move, though. All right, that's easy. And then the last two cells that are wandering cells are our neutrophils. They're another type of leukocyte, another type of white blood cell. They primarily go after bacteria. So they'll phagocytize bacteria, surround it, eat it up, gobble it up. The T lymphocytes, you'll learn about them in much more detail. I'm not even going to begin to go there, all right? But it'll fascinate you. You have T helper cells you probably heard of, and then there's cytotoxic T cells. Again, regardless, okay, point is these guys will go after viruses or foreign materials, primarily from foreign bacteria and proteins, foreign antigens. Okay, so we talked about the first component of connective tissue. The second component is protein fibers. And there's three types, okay? Three types. The first are the strongest and the biggest. And you need to know this, they do not branch. All right, that's collagen. You guys have heard of collagen, collagen injections, collagen. When you have scar tissue being made, it's primarily collagen fibers, and they're very strong. So we'll find, all right, collagen fibers in abundance in tendons and in ligaments. And we'll talk about the specific type of my brain's not working, connective tissue in a moment. All right, second type is the reticular fibers. All right, they're similar, okay, similar to collagen, except they're smaller, they're thinner, and these guys can branch, all right, but they're found in what we call hollow organs. And so what they do is they form the stroma, and stroma are basically just these compartments. So if you look at a lymph node here, a lymph node will have all these small little compartments, these little rooms here. And that's where we'll have different cells that kind of, I don't want to say hide out there, but they just hang out there. But it can create these little compartments and whatnot. All right. So reticular fibers are going to be found in organs that have like hollow organs, lymphatic organs, the spleen. We'll talk more about that. And then finally, we have elastic fibers. Okay, elastic fibers, and we're all familiar with elastic, all right? They can stretch and recoil easily. So you're going to find them in tissues that need to be able to be stretched and then snap back and recoil, all right? So we'll see it in some of the larger arteries. The walls of the arteries are skin. Think about our skin. The epiglottis, We'll talk more about that in detail, but just think of stretch and recoil. All right, and then the last component of connective tissue is the ground substance. Okay, so very important that you understand that ground substance is non-cellular material, but it's by the cells. Go figure, right? Right. But this is where the cells and the protein fibers hang out. So I tell folks, ground substance is like the canvas of a painting. All right. And then you just throw the protein fibers onto that canvas and you throw the cells up onto the canvas. And that's what the ground substance is. All right. There's different consistencies to ground substance. It can be liquidy kind of, all right, viscous like our blood, all right, or it could be like the basement membrane of the epithelium. Yeah, similar to the basement membrane. Yeah, like very similar. It can also be semi-solid or solid like bone. Okay. So we already talked about the extracellular matrix. It's ground substance plus the protein fibers that gives us the extracellular matrix there. All right. So ground substance is going to be made up of different, for the most part, if you want the skinny of it, ground substance is pretty much water and then large molecules. And that's pretty much what it is. Okay, so some of these molecules are listed here. The first one are what we call GAGs, or glycosaminoglycans. All right, but basically the important thing that you want to know about this type of molecule is that it's a cation. So it has a charge to it, but water is drawn to it. Okay, hence why ground substance has a large water content. Right? It's just a big molecule that sits in the ground substance there that attracts water and allows water to follow it in. The other one here is the proteoglycans. Right? This is, again, a molecule with protein and carbohydrates, all right, that will attach onto the glycosaminoglycans and allow for the configuration of the ground substance. And the final one, we already talked about the glycoproteins when we were talking about proteins earlier. Okay, it's a protein molecule with a carbohydrate attached to it. All right, but it allows, all right, your protein fibers and the connective tissue cells, all right, to bond onto the ground substance. Okay. Sorry, my neighbor's car alarm is going off as they're driving the car. Has anyone ever heard of that happening before? I figured that your car alarm would just shut off when you're driving the car. Very weird. All right, here's a picture of connective tissue. We'll get into more detail here. All right, so I bring up this topic of scurvy because scurvy, all right, is a condition. I know, it's funny. It's just weird. My neighborhood is just crazy. You know, I want to, and when I say this, please don't make it seem like that I want to literally do this, but I want to kill my neighbor's dogs. They have 4 dogs. They leave them outside all the time. They bark all the time. It's really inconsiderate, and it drives me crazy to the point where, and my wife and I have discussed going over there and talking to them, but we're going to do the good cop, bad cop thing. She'll go over there and talk to them and be nice, because I won't be as nice. Because I'll go over there at 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning when the dogs are still outside barking, and I'll start ringing the doorbell and pounding on the door until someone answers the door. So it's good to send the good cop over than the bad cop, right? You know what? I was thinking that, and you know, we actually bought a dog whistle, and it was crap. I was going to do that every time I heard it, but we have a dog too, and I feel bad. I don't want to bother her. My dog is the best dog in the world. Just saying, and I would gladly bring her to school if I could get her certified as a service dog, but she would intimidate a lot of people because she's the sweetest thing in the world. All right, anyways, scurvy. Scurvy is the type, I'm sure. If I could have more, I would, but then I would have to live on a farm. Scurvy is a condition that affects collagen, and we don't go into it in this course, but collagen is going to be that protein fiber that tissue matter that adds strength and stability to a lot of body tissues. And during its process of it being made, during its synthesis, at one point you need vitamin C because it essentially cleaves off these ends of collagen when it is being synthesized. And if you don't, it leaves these kind of frayed ends on the end of the collagen fiber, and it impacts its integrity, and it makes weaker collagen. So what happened was when went to sea, and they were off to sea, like Christopher Columbus and his crew sailing across, and they're off on the ocean for several months, like Magellan circling the globe. Sailors would get bleeding gums, and they wouldn't feel their energy levels would start to diminish, and they'd get these little red dots all over their shins. They're called petechial hemorrhages. And they found out that it's because they weren't getting enough vitamin C. Vitamin C is found in large amounts, obviously, in some of our citrus fruits. But a lot of times these sailors wouldn't go to sea, SEA, with citrus fruits that contain vitamin C. So, I'm not sure, and I read somewhere that the beer would not last long. It would actually ferment, and actually it would go bad. I am not quite sure about that, but that's how. And the term scurvy came from, I think, lemons, but I cannot remember why or how. I knew at one point, but I forgot. But pretty much when they found out with vitamin C, all right, it helps you make the collagen appropriately and restores its integrity. I know it's not my thing either, but the only time that you'll see scurvy now is in third world countries, but very rarely, especially in malnourished areas. But if you see here in the U.S., it's usually because that person is not getting enough nutrition. All right, so you might see it in areas that are very rural or inner city areas. But a simple way to do it is just give them food that's high in vitamin C, or just take some vitamin C supplements. All right, another chart here. I want to draw your attention to this chart here. I know I mentioned it with epithelial tissue. I'm going to mention it with connective tissue. Look at this chart. This will help you with the organization of connective tissue, right? So connective tissue, we talked about mesenchyme. That's the embryonic stem cells, all right? And they'll differentiate and give us this tissue here. There's three types of connective tissue are connective tissue proper, supporting connective tissue, and fluid connective tissue. We won't spend a lot of time on this, all right? But we will spend a lot of time on this. You get to talk more on this in 211. So we break connective tissue proper down into two subcategories, loose and dense. And then each of these connective tissue categories have three specific subcategories. So loose has areolar, adipose, reticular. We're going to go through this. And then dense connective has dense regular, dense irregular, and elastic. Now moving over here to the supporting connective tissue, we just have two. This is easy. Cartilage and bone. And then cartilage has three types of cartilage. Hyaline cartilage, fibrocartilage, and elastic cartilage. And there's two types of bone. There's compact bone and spongy bone. All right, we won't talk about the spongy bone in lab so much. And then for the fluid connective tissue, blood and lymph. Okay, so I would recommend taking a look at this figure here. It's figure 5.9, chapter 5. Starting with this, just get a good idea, okay, of the breakdown of connective tissue. It'll help to give you a little bit of clarity and organization. All right, so connective tissue proper. All right, that's the first. That was the one all the way to the left of that chart. And the first category that we're going to talk about is loose connective tissue. So in loose connective tissue, we don't see a lot of cells, all right, or protein fibers, but we do see a lot of ground substance. Okay, so the protein fibers are just running amok. There's no order to them. They're just this way, that way, all right? So in a sense, loose connective tissue makes great packing material in our body. We just shove it into certain areas there, okay? So there's three types: areolar, adipose, and reticular. So we're going to go through each one individually now. All right. So areolar, okay, mainly is going to have collagen and elastic fibers, but there's no organization to them. They're just thrown in. They're all haphazardly. Okay. So if you look down at the picture here, you can see you've got some collagen fibers, these bigger guys here, and then you've got your elastic fibers, these thin little strands, but they're all over the place. There's no rhyme or reason to their organization. And because of that, you can see these little purple dots here. Those are our fibroblasts. There's not a lot of them, not like epithelial tissue where they're all packed together. All right, but you do see a lot of white here, and the white represents the ground substance here. Okay, so you see a lot of white. So there's a kind of a lot of space in this type of connective tissue, where your body likes to put blood vessels where there's a lot of space. So that's why areolar connective tissue is highly vascularized. It'll have a lot of blood vessels there. Okay, so we see an abundant amount of ground substance. Okay, so we're going to find this type of connective tissue in one of the layers of our skin. And then there's a layer of tissue below our skin called the subcutaneous layer. That's where we get the fat that sits right under our skin. When people talk about insulation and whatnot, it sits in that layer, the subcutaneous layer. All right, it's packing material, so we'll see it surrounding our organs. And it likes to go and layer itself along our nerves and our muscle cells, and also the layers of our blood vessels. Okay, so you see it quite a bit all over the body. All right, that's areolar connective tissue. The next one is easier. Adipose, fat. Okay, so the primary cell that you'll see are adipocytes. All right, and when you're born, you have two types. You've got white and brown fat. The white is the one that sticks with you for the rest of your life. This is the one that stores energy, right, and acts as an insulator that I just talked about in the subcutaneous layer, or it surrounds some of your tissues and cushions those tissues. Now, when you're a little baby, you have this what's called brown fat. A lot of that is found under, you have a little bit still, it's usually hiding out underneath your scapula, your shoulder blades, all right? Found in considerable amounts in newborns, but this helps to generate heat for the newborns. But we start to lose it, all right, and as we get older, it decreases significantly, okay? So adipose tissue, adipocytes, can be enlarged or shrunken. Now, if they're enlarged, that means they're packed with fat, lipids, triglycerides, all right? If they're shrunken, that means they don't have very many lipids, triglycerides inside them. So it really depends on the state of energy that you're in. If you're a person that doesn't get much exercise and is relatively sedentary, and your diet consists of a large amount of food, okay, then there's a good chance that your adipocytes will be enlarged. If you're a person that's been out to sea for a couple of weeks, all right, and you haven't eaten in a while, then there's a good chance that your adipocytes will be shrunken because you are utilizing and metabolizing the lipids there. The third type of loose connective tissue is going to be our reticular connective tissue, okay? Remember what I was saying about, well, hold on, I'll get there, all right? So with reticular connective tissue, we'll see a high amount or an abundant amount of reticular protein fibers, all right? You'll also see fibroblasts and leukocytes, white blood cells. So when you see leukocytes, you want to think of the immune system or organs or tissues that have to do with the immune system. So we'll see this type of connective tissue in lymphatic organs. The spleen, which is the largest lymphatic organ. All right, lymph nodes, you guys are familiar with those because those become swollen when you get certain infections, mainly viral infections. All right, the thymus, which is a gland that you're not really familiar with, that sits, all right, in your chest. All right, that's the gland where your T lymphocytes go to mature, and they have to undergo testing to see if they know the difference between your cells and foreign cells. And then finally in your bone marrow, because your bone marrow is where your blood's made. And when I say your blood formed elements, your red blood cells, your white blood cells, and your platelets. And they all get made there. Well, your bones have made these compartments so they can section things off from one another. Because once the cells are made, they still have to mature. So they get to hang out there for a little while. All right. So those were the 3 different types of connective tissue proper, loose connective tissue. Now we're going to talk about the 3 types of dense connective tissue proper. Okay? So if you look at the term dense, all right, in this situation, things are going to be packed closer together. So this type of tissue is mostly protein fibers. Will have considerably less ground substance. Okay? And the type of protein fiber that really stands out is collagen. Okay, so there's 3 types: dense regular, dense irregular, and elastic. So the first one is dense regular. So here's the important thing. I want you to think of lasagna noodles for those of you that have eaten lasagna. And that's the configuration that the collagen assumes. Because what happens is these collagen fibers lay right on top of each other in a parallel configuration. They're tightly packed. Okay, so there's not a lot of space. And if there's not a lot of space, there's not a lot of ground substance. Okay? And if there's not a lot of ground substance, then, and hence not a lot of space, then remember what I said. Your body likes to grow blood vessels in areas where there's a lot of space. Since there's not, you have very few blood vessels. And if you don't have a lot of blood vessels, you're not getting a lot of blood if you injure yourself, so it takes a long time to heal. Okay? And for those of you that have ever injured a tendon or a ligament, okay, you know what I mean. All right? So in this type of situation, all right, for tendons and ligaments, stress is applied to these tissues are usually applied in one direction. And they're very strong. That one direction, all right, is the tests the tensile strength of that tissue. Okay? What that means is your Achilles tendon has the tensile strength of steel. All right? So they've said that you could literally hang a Volkswagen Bug off of a healthy Achilles tendon. That's how strong that is. Right? But it's able to handle the stress in a single direction, right? But if you start applying multi-directional stresses to that Achilles tendon, it could tear and it become damaged, okay? Pop, yeah, that's right. Pop goes the Achilles tendon. The second type of dense connective tissue is dense irregular. Notice the term irregular. That means you've got these clumps. You can see it here in the picture. You got these clumps of the collagen, all right? These swirly, twirly clumps. The nice thing about it is that this type of connective tissue can handle stress in multiple directions, right? Which is great for our skin. Try pulling your skin in multiple different directions. It can withstand that stress, right? Which is awesome, okay? So we're going to see this type of connective tissue in our skin, in the periosteum of the bone. What the heck is that? That's the outer layer of your bone. That's where tendons and ligaments will attach to, okay? So it needs to be able to withstand multiple direction or multi-directional stresses, all right? Perichondrium is your cartilage version of the periosteum. And then you have certain organs in your body that have capsules around them. All right, your kidneys, for example, have a capsule around them. All right, well, any capsule that surrounds an organ is going to be made of dense irregular connective tissue because things are going to attach to that capsule surrounding that organ there. All right, the third and final dense connective tissue is elastic. Okay, so the predominant protein fiber in elastic tissue is elastic protein fibers, but they are packed close together. And we learned that elastic fibers, all right, stretch and recoil. So we're going to find this type of connective tissue in the walls of large arteries like your aorta, all right, some of the big name arteries that are found in your chest, right? Your trachea, and what I'm using right now, my vocal cords. All right, elastic connective tissue. All right, that's it for the connective tissue proper. Now we're going to go to the second type of connective tissue, which is supporting connective tissue. Supporting connective tissue has two subtypes under it, cartilage and bone. So we're going to start with, then there's three types of cartilage. The first type of cartilage, is this too much? It's a lot. I know, like I say, it is a lot. But the good news is that we're close to being done with this chapter. Okay, we're very close to being done with it. All right, so let's start off with hyaline cartilage. It is the most abundant cartilage. It's the most abundant cartilage, okay, in our bodies. All right, and so it is surrounded by perichondrium, which is made up of that dense irregular connective tissue. Okay, but it surrounds the cartilage itself. All right, so look at all the places that it's located in your body. The end of your nose, your trachea, your voice box or larynx, costal cartilage, that means rib cartilage. So when your ribs attach onto your sternum, okay, all that cartilage is hyaline cartilage. This is the auricular ends of the bone, or excuse me, I keep saying auricular, articular ends of the bones. That is on the ends of your long bones, you have this type of cartilage there. And that's what protects as your bones rub against each other. It protects them from grinding on one another. So if you ever heard someone say to you, oh, I don't have any more cartilage in my knees, that's what they're referring to. All right, that's the articular cartilage. So wherever you have long bones, fingers, elbow, forearm, your knees, all right, all those areas, all right, have this type of cartilage there. Prior to the 8 to 12 weeks of development, the fetus, all right, the majority of the skeleton of the fetus is made from this type of cartilage here. All right, the second type is fibrocartilage. This is one of my favorite, okay? Fibrocartilage is the weight-bearing cartilage, right? It's the atlas of cartilage. So it has a tremendous amount of collagen inside of it, right? A tremendous amount. Very little ground substance. Make a star next to this. It does not have perichondrium. It's the only type of cartilage that does not have perichondrium. That's a great true-false question, okay? I forgot to mention this. The predominant cell type in cartilage is the chondrocyte, okay? Chondrocyte. Now, fibrocartilage can resemble dense connective. What perichondrium is the covering. It goes on the outside of cartilage, and it's made up of that dense irregular connective tissue. So again, if certain structures need to attach onto cartilage, it's going to attach onto that perichondrium. We'll get into it in a little bit more detail. Once we do chapter 7, that's when we do the bones, you'll have a little bit of a better understanding as to what perichondrium is. So Heather, don't worry, you will trust me. When I'm done, I'll explain the periosteum to you, and then we'll yeah, you're very welcome. We'll talk about the perichondrium too. So if you look here, all right, you can see here's a chondrocyte, but you have these kind of wavy structures right here. All right, those are actually your the collagen fibers, but it's very close to dense regular connective tissue. Okay, so we find fibrocartilage in 3 places in our body. The discs in your spine, intervertebral discs, all right, your knee joints, the menisci, all right, these shock absorbers in your knees, and then the pubic symphysis. The pubic symphysis is where your hip bones come together in the front of your body, your pelvis. and there's a disc there, and that is made of fibrocartilage. All right, the last type of cartilage is elastic cartilage. This is, again, the springy, flexible kind. So if you go and flick your ears, all right, you're flicking the elastic cartilage. In this situation, all right, this type of cartilage has predominantly elastic fibers in it. Again, but elastic fibers are densely packed. All right. Also, the chondrocytes will be very densely packed. And we see that we have perichondrium. Fibrocartilage does not. So you're going to see elastic cartilage in your ear, right? I shouldn't say in your ear, and the external ear. The pinna is what it's called, and it's what's on the outside of your head there. And then the epiglottis. All right, the epiglottis is that little flap that will cover trachea, or actually the glottis, which is the opening to your trachea. So when you're swallowing liquids or swallowing solid food, all right, it pushes it as it's going down. So does that mean less blood flow there too? Yes, I'm sorry. So yeah, I did not see that. It does mean less blood flow. Correct. The epiglottis will close over the opening there, so you don't swallow anything. I mean, well, you will swallow anything, so nothing gets into your respiratory system there. And the elastic cartilage allows it to snap back open, all right, when you're done swallowing. Because if it didn't snap back open, it would stay over the glottis, which is the opening there to your trachea, and you would suffocate and die. All right, the second type of supporting connective tissue is bone. And there's two types of bone, compact bone and spongy bone, but we're only going to show you the compact bone. All right, I'm telling you, the rest of this slideshow kind of moves fast because there's really not much to talk about. Okay, so we'll get into more detail in chapter 7 when we talk about bone, but you can see, all right, these structures here are called osteons. And when we get into the labeling part, you'll get a little bit of a better understanding. But an osteon are these structures that are closely packed together that are, the osteon is the functional unit of bone. Okay, so now we're into the last type of connective tissue. We had connective tissue proper, supporting connective tissue, and now finally fluid connective tissue. Okay, and there's two types of fluid connective tissue. All right, blood and lymph. Okay, so here is our blood connective tissue. Red blood cells, here's some lymphocytes here. Okay, we've got a lymphocyte and a neutrophil. Neutrophils, remember, those are the guys that go after the bacteria. Then you got little dots on here, those are the platelets. That's how small the platelets are. All right, and then finally, no, that's it. I guess I thought I had a lymph slide, but I don't. Okay, guys, connective tissue is over. All right, breath in, breath out. We've only got 2 more tissues to go, and they're the easier ones. Much easier, trust me. All right. So the first one is muscle tissue. All right. Oh, I shouldn't say the first one, but muscle tissue has 3 types, and I'll type them out here real fast. All right. First type is the skeletal. Okay. The second one is cardiac. Okay. And the third is smooth. Okay. Whoops. I don't know why that does that. All right. So those are the 3 muscle tissue types. So we're going to talk about the first one, skeletal. Skeletal tissue, okay. Skeletal muscle cells are long cylinders, like long paper towel cylinders. Well, a couple of the things that you're noticing here. One, they have striations, okay, alternating light and dark areas. They have many nuclei, so they're called multinucleated, and they're very long cylindrical cells, and they don't branch. Okay? They don't branch. You're going to find skeletal muscle tissue throughout the body. Okay. The next type of muscle tissue is cardiac. Okay. cardiac muscle tissue, where do you think you would find cardiac muscle tissue? I know you're messing with me. Yes, you'll find cardiac muscle tissue in your heart. Right on. All right. So one of the things I failed to mention to you about skeletal muscle tissue is that it's voluntary or consciously controlled tissue. Okay. You can, as you're doing, if you're writing things down or typing on your keyboard, you're using skeletal muscle. Cardiac is involuntary. You can't control it. Okay. But it is striated. Tough to kind of see here. Okay. But there are striations, alternating light and dark areas. Cardiac muscle tissue will have 1 to 2 nuclei per cell, so they can have more than one. And they also will branch. You can see how this one cell here is branching here and here, okay? And they've got this other characteristic, which are called intercalated discs. And intercalated discs, all right, have what we call desmosomes and gap junctions. And there are these connections between these muscle cells. But for our purposes right now, all you need to know is that it helps with the electrical current that flows across muscle tissue. If you've ever got an EKG and they put all these leads on you, okay, a 12-lead EKG, and basically they're checking the conduction system of your heart, all right? And the conduction system of your heart allows for that electrical signal to move across, all right, these muscle cells. Well, these intercalated discs help with that. All right, and the last type of tissue, for muscle tissue, is smooth muscle tissue. Smooth muscle tissue, again, is involuntary. You cannot consciously control it. We call it smooth muscle tissue because it's not striated. These cells look somewhat like a football also. They're tapered, right? They refer to it as fusiform. They have one nucleus, okay? And you'll find this, all right, all over your body, like in your stomach, in your small intestines, all right? In a lot of the hollow organs of your body, in your blood, in the walls of your blood vessels, okay? All right, folks, one more tissue to go. Whoop, whoop. All right, that's nervous tissue. Okay, nervous tissue. All right, so let's start off. Where are you going to find the nervous tissue? You're going to find it in 3 places: in your brain, your spinal cord, and nerves. Now, the spinal cord make up your central nervous system, or CNS. Okay, and then the nerves make up the peripheral nervous system, or the PNS. Okay. So there's 2 types of cells that we're going to talk about with nervous tissue. The first one is the diva, the one that gets all the credit, the neuron. All right. The neurons are going to be the superstar of nervous tissue. And their job is to receive, transmit, and then even process nerve information, or what we call nerve impulses. Okay? So they're going to transmit information, electrical impulses or nervous signals throughout your body, from your brain down to your toes. All right, from your brain to your heart, from your brain or from your spine out, to your liver. Okay. So that's it on neurons. In chapter 12, we'll label the specific anatomy of a neuron, but we're not going to do that here. The other type of cell are called glial cells. And these are a larger number than the neurons. There's more glial cells than neurons in your body, okay? But you need to understand something. They do not transmit nerve signals, okay? They got I won't say a much bigger job, but their job is to protect the neurons, okay? Also provide nutrients to the neurons. And what they'll even do is support the neurons, hold them into place. But if for example, if a neuron gets damaged, right, and if it's permanently damaged, these glial cells will fill the space wherever that damaged area was. Okay? Show you a picture. Here you go. Here is our neuron. So here you can see the drawing for the neuron. All right? It's got the cell body here with one long process coming off. That's called the axon. Then you got all these other little smaller processes coming off. Those are dendrites. So you can kind of see that here. Okay? And these little dots here, right, that you see running around, those are going to be the nuclei of the glial cells. You can see how much smaller they are. But there's many more of them. What? There's 2 neurons here, but in this picture here, I'm not going to go and count them, but there's close to 10 to 12, all right, glial cells. So that's what we're saying, that they're much more, they're larger in number, all right, than the neurons themselves. All right, y'all. That's it for, not for class, sorry. We're going to do a little bit of labeling here. Okay? I know, thank goodness. It's over. I want to see if we can finish labeling. We should be able to. If we don't, no worries. I didn't get a chance to finish it with the other class, so it's not as much, trust me. Let me just pull this up here. There we go. Bam. Ah, shoot. Hold on. I just had it up there. All right. I know. Womp, womp, womp. There we go. All right. Booyah. All right. So we're going to start off with the connective tissue proper. Areolar connective tissue. That's our loose connective tissue. So here you can see, okay, we have, I'll show you the, I got slides that point out each thing, but this you can see, and it's not white, the background isn't white, but you can see, all right, the protein fibers are just haphazardly laid down on here. All right, you scattered cells throughout the place, but not a lot. All right, but you have a lot of ground substance there. Okay, so here you can see a collagen fiber. That's this big, thick guy right here. And you got one back here. Okay, so that's, and then you got a couple over here. Here's one, here's another one, here's another one. Ooh, I don't know what page that's on. If anybody wants to shout that one out. Page 6, hoorah. Now this, you're not going to be jumping around, so you shouldn't have to worry about it. It's not going to be as bad as the labeling was before. All right, and then also you can see we have a nice squiggly elastic fiber right here, okay? And elastic fibers can branch. Collagen fibers do not. So where do we find this loose connective tissue, this areolar connective tissue? All right, in the layer of our dermis, right? Well, and you'll learn the different layers to the skin. That's why I'm just being general here and say it's in one of the layers of our skin. And then the subcutaneous layer, which is this layer of tissue that sits underneath our skin. All right, the second type of loose connective tissue is adipose. Adipose is easy. The predominant cell type is the adipocyte, and that's what you're seeing here. This whole thing is an adipocyte, and it's just loaded with lipids. And the nucleus is getting pushed up against the edge there because it's full of fat. All right, so adipose tissue, we'll see again in that subcutaneous layer there, but we're going to see it surrounding organs because it acts as cushioning. All right, and you'll see it in other areas. Well, I already mentioned that subcutaneous layer, in the omentum, which is like this fatty apron that drapes over your intestines. You see it all over the place. And the final type of loose connective tissue is going to be our reticular connective tissue. See all these little compartments that are all over the place? All right, so again, you're going to see this a lot in hollow organ structures. All right, those black lines, anything that's a black line there, guess what? That's a reticular fiber. Okay, remember our 3 protein fibers: collagen, Reticular, elastic. You need to know those, because a question might be specifically asking you not to identify the tissue, but what type of protein fiber that's in that picture. All right, so if you have an arrow pointing to something, make sure that you're looking at the slide and that there's no words associated with it. Okay? Because if there's the words will tell you, people lose points because they don't read the question. Not all the questions or slides will have words. It'll just have a slide there. It'll ask you to identify what it is. But in some cases, that might want you to be specific about something. So where do we find this type of tissue? Again, in our a lot of our lymphatic organs, all right, like the spleen, thymus gland, all right, lymph nodes. All right, you'll also see, I forgot to mention that or on the previous slides, bone marrow, okay? All right, let's check out some of our dense connective tissue. The first type of dense connective tissue is dense regular connective tissue. So well, you can see there's not very much ground substance. Don't pay attention to this area here. This is outside of that tissue, all right? But you can see there's very little white. Maybe there's this here, all right? And I think that was damaged because of this during the slide preparation here. But there's very little white in here, and that's our ground substance, okay? So you can see, but there's a tremendous amount of collagen fibers, which are pretty much these lines right here. This is all collagen. All right, and then these dark spots here, those are fibroblasts, because the fibroblasts make the collagen. All right, the second type of connective tissue, dense connective tissue, is the dense irregular connective tissue. Now you can see there's a little bit more ground substance, a little bit more, but the collagen fibers are swirly, they're clustered. Okay, so this stuff is great for multi-directional stresses. All right, so we'll see that in your skin. Okay, the periosteum and the perichondrium, the coverings of bone and cartilage, and any organ that has a capsule around it, it will be made up of dense irregular connective tissue. All right, the third type of dense connective tissue is elastic connective tissue. Okay, so again, we don't see a lot of ground substance here because everything is tightly packed. These elastic protein fibers are tightly packed. So what does an elastic protein fiber look like? There you go. Here's one, here's one. All these dark lines here are elastic protein fibers just jammed together. Okay, so where do we find this type of connective tissue? All right, in things that need to stretch and relax. Stretch and recoil, all right? Large blood vessels, your lungs, trachea, vocal cords. Yeah, you can see, not all of them, but you can see here's one where it's branching down here, all right? Here's one that's branching also. It's tough to tell because, again, you're trying to look at a three-dimensional structure in a two-dimensional picture. And depending on how they prepared the slide, you don't really get the full effect. All right, guys and ladies, let's check out the second type of overall connective tissue, supporting connective tissue. And there's two types of supporting connective tissue, cartilage and bone. And we're going to look at all three types of cartilage, starting with hyaline cartilage. Okay? So on the top and the bottom here of the hyaline cartilage, this is where the perichondrium is going to be. It's going to be way up here, which is the covering to the cartilage, and way down here. In the middle, you can see the predominant cell type for cartilage is a chondrocyte. So let me show you a picture of that. So in that red circle there, the arrow is pointing to the inside of that red circle, and that's a chondrocyte. That's the predominant cell type to cartilage. All right? Now that red circle is representing a space or a chamber, and the name of that chamber is called a lacuna. So make sure that you don't get confused on a test if you're asked that. If the arrow is pointing to the chamber or space, if it's pointing to the circle, then that circle it's wanting you to tell me what the circle is, and that's the lacuna. If it's pointing to the inside of the red circle, like on the previous slide here, then it wants to know chondrocyte. Okay, so think of that relationship is if you're in your bedroom, that's your lacuna, and you're the chondrocyte. You're in the bedroom. All right, and that's where I am, by the way, in case you're wondering. I'm sitting at my wife's makeup desk. Yeah, I can spell it for you. What's right here? Lacuna, and the E is added to the end if we're talking about the plural. Yep, thank you. I couldn't finish my thought. Lacuna. Lacuna matata. I know some of you were thinking that. I know I wasn't the only one. All right. So where do we find this tissue? All right. This is the most common, all right, cartilage in the body. So at the ends of long bones, all right, cartilages of your rib, trachea, the end of your nose, your voice box, the larynx, all right? And before you start growing bone as a fetus, all right, it's the fetal skeleton. All right, elastic cartilage. This is the second type of cartilage. Elastic cartilage, the chondrocytes are tightly packed. It also has perichondrium, okay? So you can see here, there's a chondrocyte right there. All right, and what surrounds the chondrocyte, that darkish line here, I'm just going to outline it. All right, that's the lacuna. So you can see the lacuna a lot easier on this slide. All right, here's the lacuna, and then the chondrocyte's inside. All right, this picture will show you. Okay, that green, black hash line is outlining the lacuna. Okay, so where do we find elastic cartilage? Things that need to bend and snap back to their original shape. The external ear, and also you're going to see it in the epiglottis. There's your elastic fibers. So you can see those are also in high abundance in elastic cartilage. I am pulling this out to the end. I've only got 13 minutes left on my laptop battery. We're close though, guys. We're close. All right. And then you got, where do we find it? External ear and the epiglottis. Okay. All right. Fibrocartilage is the third and final form of cartilage. Okay. So this is the one that does not have perichondrium, doesn't have that outer covering. Very little ground substance. Okay. Because all this is the cartilage, is the collagen. And then these dark purple or bluish, whatever you want to say, those are your chondrocytes. Like I said, fibrocartilage looks very similar to dense regular connective tissue, all right? But the fibroblasts in dense regular connective tissue do not line up like this. They're more scattered, okay? Fibrocartilage, you'll see that the chondrocytes will take that linear positioning there. All right, so there's three places in the body that we find this tissue. The intervertebral discs, okay, in your spine, the pubic symphysis, where your hip joints, hip bones come together in the front, and then the menisci of the knees. Those are the shock absorbers of your knees. All right, the second type, or the other type of supporting connective tissue is compact bone. Well, also spongy bone, but we don't have slides for the spongy bone. All right. So I want to point something out to you. This is not a cell here. Okay? That's a space. All right. This here is a lacuna. And inside the lacuna, you can't see them, are the predominant cell type for bone, which are called osteocytes. Just want to point that out. We're going to go through some things. So first of all, this circle here is is representing an osteon, which is almost like a tree. So if you cut down a tree and you look at it and the tree has these rings around it, this is very similar to what an osteon is. When we get to chapter 7, I'll explain all that to you. Okay? I'll explain to you what an osteon is and all that stuff. All right. So here you're looking at, all right, these arrows pointing to the insides of these red structures. Those red lines are representing the lacuna. Those arrows are pointing to the inside of the lacuna. And that's where the osteocytes live. The osteocytes, their job is to maintain the bone, repair the bone, nourish the bone. Okay? All right, so you can see now the arrows are pointing to the red lines themselves, and those red lines are outlining the lacuna. This is the plural for lacuna. At the center of the osteon is what we call the central canal. That is not a nucleus, it's not a space. It is not a cell, it is a space. And in that space live blood vessels and nerves. It's way too big to be a cell, and it's certainly way too big to be a nucleus. Cells live in these little holes here. And we'll talk about the purpose of the central canal, okay? This slide here is outlining these rings that go around the central canal. So around the central canal, you have these rings, much like a tree has rings, all right? The bone has rings, and we refer to those rings as lamellae. If we talk about one specific one, it's lamella, but since it's plural, we add an E to it, and it's called lamellae. And then you have these lines, these black lines here that go from lacuna to lacuna. So you can see them better here. Here's a black line, here's a lacuna, here's a lacuna. So you have these black lines that are traveling down from lacuna to lacuna, and those are called cannuliculi. We'll talk about their function in chapter 7, don't worry. If you have questions, they'll be answered when we go over chapter 7. For right now, just label it. And we find this tissue in the bones of our body. That's an easy one. All right, take a deep breath and let it all go, because we're done for tonight. This is where I finished up with the last class. All right, so we just have to finish up labeling, and there's not that many slides. There's 11 slides left, okay, for the rest of the tissue. Real easy stuff. So it'll take us maybe 5 minutes on, what's today? Thursday, on Tuesday, okay? So don't sweat it. We got this. Is there any questions for me? I'm going to stop recording here.